Good day, Trinidad and Tobago, and welcome to this week's episode of Strictly Legal, right here on WESN Content Capital. I am your host, Rondell Donowa, and I am once again excited to bring the law and you on this premier station. Last week, we spoke about the cohabitational relationships and the rights of the cohabitant spouse, as well as we spoke about the succession of the distribution of the estates of the cohabitant spouse, as well as the financial provisions if they were separated, with my guest, Mrs. Karen Nunez Teixeira, who is once again here, attorney at law, lecturer, former minister, and everything that you could think about, a very learned individual. So today we are going to discuss on the law of succession in terms of distribution of estates on a wider scale, where someone would have died with or without a will, where we say testate or intestate. Of course, I don't need to introduce her once again with her bio, because of course we know who she is. So once again, I say good morning, Mrs. Nunez Teixeira.
Good morning to you, Rondell. I'm happy again to be here, and hopefully I will be of assistance to your viewing public.
Indeed, because last week, I must say that this program, particularly that episode, was a very shared episode, rather,
because it affects people's lives.
Because it affects persons' lives.
So like company law, which is some kind of esoteric thing. This is something you live. These people are living this day every single day.
Yes, so it was quite popular. It was quite informative, and I think a lot of persons were very intrigued, and they were appreciative of the fact that you took the time out to bring the law in the simplest format, I must say. So I know last week we spoke about cohabitational relationships, and quite interesting enough, there was an article in yesterday's Newsday which spoke about a Chaguanas woman who failed to prove cohabitation in court. And if I may just read a little bit, where it stated that the son of a man who died in 2016 had successfully challenged a claim by his deceased father's business partner that they were in a cohabitational relationship. Now, in the ruling, the judge stated that the person who is saying that she was in a cohabitational relationship did not provide salient pieces of evidence to prove a cohabitation relationship existed between the two in her application to have the court recognize the relationship with the son, relationship in-law. The son in his application is saying that between 1996 and 2000, his father lived in Texas with his mother and 3 siblings. He said his father returned to Trinidad because he couldn't find work. Now, he admitted that his father was staying at Sukla's home in Chaguanas, but said she was introduced to his father as the business partner. Now, in the ruling, the judge said that the burden of proof to prove a cohabitation relationship exists in accordance with the Cohabitation Relationship Act, which we spoke about, and who offered insufficient evidence that met the criteria. So therefore, we are seeing where not all the time persons would achieve a cohabitational relationship status, and therefore what happens is that the court can rule that the siblings, or the children, are the ones who are entitled to the estate. What do you have to say on that?
So since we're breaking it down for the man in the street,
all
that sounds like a lot of legalese, but the point about it was this: had she succeeded, because from reading it, either the mother of the young man who says there were 3 children with him, his mother had 3 children for the deceased, either the mother had been divorced from the father, which means that she would not qualify, or she had been living with him, but since they had stopped living together, at least in 2000, when he came back, the law requires you to be in a cohabitation relationship continuously for 5 years, immediately preceding the death of the deceased. And since he died in 2016, or thereabouts, it's highly unlikely that the mother of those 3 children would have been entitled. And what is the significance of that? If she had succeeded, but she did not, if she had succeeded, firstly, under the intestate laws, she would have stepped into the shoe of a lawful spouse, since there was none, and she would become the spouse. And as a spouse, she would be entitled to half of the estate of the deceased, and the 3 children would get the other half. Obviously, they wouldn't get as much as she. But more importantly, and which is why he said, the son said she'd be in charge. What he meant by that, as I understood it, is under the Wills and Probate Act. What happens is Section 30A says the order priority for persons to apply for a grant. And the person who will be that person would, in that case, be that cohabitant. So what would have happened? She would have been the one entitled to apply to administer the estate, so she'd be in control, and she would have gotten half of the estate, subject to any application being made. So obviously it was a real-life situation that's why they fought it. And coming back to the point that the judge in that case felt that the requirements of a marital relationship had not been satisfied, it brings you back to cases like Delzine and Stowe, which McDonough Mendonca, when he was a High Court judge, really made one of those cases that we talk about as being a seminal case, because he had to decide, what does the law mean by bona fide domestic relationship?
Yes.
Because unlike, there was no definition. But he said, we got our legislation from North South Wales, Australia, and they did provide a definition. So it is clear that the judge looked at a number of factors. She looked at the nature and extent of the common residence. What the son said, they lived in separate rooms, whether or not they had a sexual relationship, so that follows from that. The degree of financial or interdependence between the two, the degree of commitment to a shared life, didn't seem to have that. The care and support of children where there were no children around, the performance of household duties, whatever reputation, whether people recognize that relationship as his being his wife. You know, so obviously she may have, some of the factors may have been satisfied, but not enough. So at the end of the day, her application was not successful, and as a result of which, it appears to me that the estate will go to the three children. And it will also, they will also be the ones entitled to apply for the administration. And which, remember when we had mentioned children, and we have to be very clear that when we talk about children, it does not only mean children of a marriage. Since 1981, it also means children born whether within a marriage or outside of a marriage. It includes adopted children. I don't know if they had any like that. But, you know, so it's a wider scope. So even if their mother wasn't married to their father, that's my point, it does not matter. They would be seen as if they were the children of the deceased. And no distinction made between them and children born in a marriage.
So let's discuss in terms of the broader aspect of succession. Meaning, in layman terms, we have the distribution of estates. Now, let's touch on if someone leaves a will. What is the procedure? I mean, that should be simple in terms of carrying out what the testator would have wanted.
Right. So Trinidad has a peculiar situation rather than all other jurisdictions, England, all other Caribbean islands, is that usually in the law it says a will speaks and takes effect upon death of the testator. So it means that the executor appointed under the will, because that's what a will do. You want someone to administer your estate. So if you're dealing with probate, a grant of probate, you would have an executor who's willing and able. So he didn't die before you, he did not renounce, and he can he can go ahead and apply. So in Trinidad, the situation is that until you get that grant from the court, the estate vests, without getting too legal, in the Administrator General. So to prevent the estate from lapsing. So to get a grant for will, of course, the will has to be valid. And people have to be very mindful of these things. One, that that he didn't revoke the will, right? And sometimes when you're looking for the will, you can't find it. It happens a lot of times. So
a new will is a new will.
Well, you can't find the old will because somebody found the will and tore it up or got rid of it. So that's why it's a good thing to put your will in the probate registry. So you have a will, it must be a valid will, it must be properly executed. How many wills fail? Meaning that you've got to have the testator. You don't have to see the will, you just have to say, this is my will. Or he could even sign in another room and say, listen, this is my signature to my will. I want you to witness it. So the two witnesses must stay together at the same time. Nobody must leave the room. They must all stay together and see each other. And when the whole process is over, you can't walk out and come back in. No, everybody must stay together. So once you have done that, and there's no claim of the lack of testamentary capacity, and there's no other challenge to the will, then you can, whoever is the executor or executors can apply for grant of probate, which is where he has left a valid will with executors who are willing to prove the will.
No, let's discuss. Let's touch on an issue here. Can anyone challenge the will? Because of course, you know, sometimes you would find that spouses could be very mean in terms of leaving nothing for their spouse. Can a spouse challenge the validity of that will?
Well, there are two ways of doing it. You can go under the family provisions, and we have mentioned this. Trinidad and I think one other jurisdiction is different even from England, that you're right if you are successful as a spouse, saying, listen, he made a will and he left little or nothing for me, you know, and you know, I was a good wife to him, etc., etc., etc. Your entitlement is not limited to maintenance only. In other words, you can get a big part of that estate as opposed to other applicants, right? The other way is, of course, when you have filed all the documents, which will be the certified copy of the will, the executor's oath, there's a precedent in the back of the Wills and Probate Act, the certified affidavit of an attesting witness who said, yes, I was there and everything was done as was supposed to be done according to the law, the inventory, the assets and liabilities of the deceased, an application, which is a standard application form, which is in the back of the Wills and Probate thing. There's also a search. You will send in that search early, because why are you sending in the search is that in the probate registry, they will look to see if anyone else has lodged an application for a grant.
Yes.
That's one way you'll find out, or also whether there is a will registered with them.
Lodged,
so there is a thing, when all of that is done and you pay the filing fees, the registrar, I'm sure everybody sees it, a whole page where they put in applications for grant, and they put it on.
That's advertised.
Advertised, yes. 2 successive weeks, I think. That is your opportunity to say, wait, he's applying for a grant? No, 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 no. I am going to lodge a caveat. And that can start a whole set of proceedings. Essentially,
and just for the person who don't know what a caveat is, of course.
Well, a caveat is effectively notice to the court that you are objecting to the grant of the probate to the executors, and you will have to then, it follows through with a whole process that is involved, essentially ending up sometimes with you either withdrawing your objection when you are satisfied that it's a good, valid will, or ending up in court in contentious probate. So you have an option. Once the application is advertised, you can wait till then and lodge a caveat that would stop things, or you can let it go through and make an application for under the family provisions, or you can make an application, which is, all that would become expensive, an application for revocation of the will, maybe on the basis that that was not the last will, because it's the last will,
or fraud,
or fraud or something, or undue influence, or lack of testamentary capacity. So we don't want to get too much into the nitty-gritty of it, but there are ways to challenge, because especially if the estate is a big estate, a lot of money involved, and you know, a lot of times, unfortunately, I've seen it time and time again, when people die, everybody's decent to each other. From the day mommy and daddy pass out, every clause come out, and
That's
then
right.
it is, and it breaks up families. It does, you know. So it's always good to leave a will, and to make sure that you can do this too. If you feel that a child may not be happy with what you left them, you can give a reason in the will. They mightn't be happy about that. Or if your husband, you could give that, because if they go under family provisions, then they will use your reasons. It's only as a reason why, listen, she didn't leave you this because she helped you, gave you X, Y, and Z. You were a terrible husband to her, you were a terrible wife to her, and you had no marital relationship, or your son was awful, he treated you badly, and he would take the money and just spend it out. Because
and this is real life.
Yes,
This is real life.
And that's why you put it in.
Yes.
You get an opportunity, because remember, you're now dead, So the will is what's speaking for you. That is what, if you have anything to say, that's where to say it.
That man tells no tales. Let us take a break, and when we come back, we will deal with persons who have died without leaving a will, intestacy. You are watching Strictly Legal with Ronald Donowa and Ms. Karen Nunes Teixeira. We'll be right back. And welcome back. We are speaking about the law of succession, basically distribution of estates when someone dies. Now, Mrs. Teixeira, in terms of the persons who would have died without a will, or we call them died intestate, what are the criteria that has to be satisfied, or what is the steps to take to to distribute the estate.
Right. So I just want to mention, and I won't go into it because
Certainly.
we don't have time, but you can have a situation where there's a will, but the executor has either renounced or he has died before the testator. So you have what they call letters of administration with will annexed. But we're not dealing with that. We're going straight in intestacy. So there's no will or no valid will, as the case may be. So who are the persons entitled? The persons entitled, well, you look at the wills and probate for the persons entitled to apply for the grant, and then you look at the Distribution of Estates Act to look at the persons who are entitled to the estate, which usually are one and the same anyhow. And then you can't forget the family provisions, because that allows, as we saw last week.
And then we have the Succession Act as well.
Well, no, when I say the family provisions,
provisions,
Succession Act, only Part 8 of the Succession Act, which deals with family provisions, deals with what I was saying. Apart from Section 122, it deals with the fact that we got rid of estate duty since 1981.
Yes.
So when we're looking at it, we're looking at the Wills and Probate Act, Section 30A, that gives you the order priority for the person to apply for the grant. You're looking at the Distribution of Estates Act, which deals with the persons entitled to the estate, and the Family Provision section of the Succession Act, when someone says, wait a minute, he didn't leave enough for me, or I should have gotten more, or whatever the argument is. Kind of a little harder on an intestacy, but we saw with a cohabitant it can happen, and you make an application. Okay?
So let's start with the people who are entitled.
Okay, so the persons who are entitled to apply would be the spouse, and if there is no married spouse, as we call it, it would then be the cohabitant, and then if there's no cohabitant or spouse, it would be the children. And no more than 4 persons can apply for a grant. So if the person left 10, 20 children, they have to decide among themselves who will apply.
But they cannot nominate one person.
Well, I would never want to say one. It's never good to have just one. You know, unless of course there's only one child, so there's no problem. But if there are a number of children, I don't think it's a good thing to leave that authority to one person.
But I know there's a form where you can renounce your right to apply.
Renunciation. Yeah. Yes, you can do that. Yes. But what I'm saying is that when we're coming to applying for the grant, there's no lawful spouse or cohabitant, and we deal with children. Remember, as we know, that children include children born within or without, outside of a marriage, adopted children under the Adoption Act. It's not just, you know, that's my adopted child. No.
I think that's important to note. Children that were born within and out of a marriage. Yes.
There's no distinction in the law once you can prove that that man is your father. So the easiest way, of course, well, if you're married, there's a presumption, just a presumption that is a child of the marriage. Often, sometimes it's not really correct, but there's a presumption. That's why it's called a presumption.
Yes.
Right? Or if you, even if you were married and you had children, he could have had other children before and after, and the easiest way would have been his name on the birth certificate. So that would make it very easy for you to prove that you are a child of the deceased.
And let's take a pen. Let's say, for instance, the deceased name is not on the birth certificate.
That's where it is. And also, not only his name, not on the birth certificate. Unfortunately, it happens because, understandably, with mothers, they may not want to leave a no name for the father, especially when they're going to register the child and all of that. So they get a good friend. They do it a lot, eh? You got to get a friend, just put his name. You have to go to the registrar, district registrar to do that, but they do it, you know. But if the father's name is not there, then you have to go under the Status of Children Act for a paternity order. And under the paternity order, you are applying and saying that even though, well, if the father is alive, I suppose it would be easier that that he is your father, and you would do DNA. DNA is one of the ways now. The case law now is showing. You see that blood test? Yeah. Blood test couldn't tell you that he's not. But DNA is far more reliable to determine paternity if it is being contested by the father. If he accepts and says, yes, that's my child, and he puts in an affidavit or declaration to that effect, well, we won't have that problem. But if you have to go the next step, court will order DNA testing to be done, because that's the most reliable form of proving that. Yeah. They also put in an affidavit saying, well, you know, maybe the priest from the neighborhood or somebody well-respected teacher, everybody knew that he was the father. He used to come and brought nappies for the child. He'd play with the child. He'd say that was his child. It was a public. So it can be done. It gets a little bit more murky when the father is dead. And very few jurisdictions allow you to make an application for paternity order when the father has died, because a dead man tells no tales.
Indeed.
But nevertheless, the court does allow you to do it, and what they do is it's not just relying on your word. They send out persons who are employed by the state to go into the neighborhood and ask persons and neighbors to verify your version of the relationship. But in Trinidad, until recently, as far as certainly when I had written my book, it was fairly easy for persons to get a paternity order after the father had died if they could have some affidavits corroborating their version of it. So those are the persons. And
so those are the entitlement persons who are entitled to apply?
Yes, they're entitled to apply. And when you deal with intestacy, it usually follows rights to the estate. So if he left children, all the children have share the estate equally. So
we're saying that the spouse shares half, but the spouse gets...
No, but if the spouse is not there, if the spouse, okay, so if we're dealing, if there was a spouse, yes, okay, so if we're dealing with a spouse cohabitant, right, yes, she's going to get half, and the children are going to get, one child will get the other half. If he leaves a spouse cohabitant, she will get a half again, and the children, how many ever they may be, will get the other half to be shared among them. If there are no children, and if there are no children at all, or great-grandchildren or grandchildren, that spouse or cohabitant will get everything. And similarly, if he leaves no cohabitant spouse, but leaves children, grandchildren, they will share it, and there will be no distinction between children born within a marriage or a marriage, provided that the father's name is on the birth certificate, or you have gotten a paternity order from the court acknowledging and it is the DNA is what is to be done now, because there are cases even here in Trinidad where persons were made to believe for many, many years that they were the father of a child, and after some years, for whatever reason, they started doubting it, and they went to court, and they were successful with the DNA to have themselves removed. It's very tragic for the child, have themselves removed as the father of the child, and their name taken off as the child's last name too.
Yeah,
it's a very hard thing.
Yeah.
It happens quite a bit, but you know, as I'm saying that, I remember when I was teaching at the Faculty of Law, one of my students, she was she had done science before, and she's from Jamaica. She said in making applications when fathers in the States applying to bring their children up, minor children, the court is not, the American system, they are not embassy, they're not prepared to just accept father's name on the birth certificate, because they has been shown that at least in 1/3 of the cases that they have to do the DNA, that when they do the DNA, that man is not the father.
Wow. And is there a time frame in which you have to apply for letters of administration?
Well, it's say 1 year, and if you go to the Administrator General's Act, it allows you after 1 year, and you're not doing anything, you're sitting on your, I think it's for bad mind, or sometimes it's just bad mind too, right? Because they have to get a lawyer to do it. Once the estate is valued over 960, you cannot do it yourself. You have to do it through an attorney at law, and you have to pay the probate expenses out of the estate, funeral expenses, those are debts of the estate. So you can make an application to the court for the person who is being the person to apply to account for the administration of the estate. And when you ask them to account for the administration of the estate, then he has to really tell the court for 1 year why he did nothing.
Yes, and therefore, if they don't apply, then the Administrator General can appoint.
Yes. Or one of the children, one of the other children. Now, also too, if all of them, if there are more than a number of siblings, and only 2 applying, you will also want them to put in their written consent to the applicants applying. Because you have to say he died leaving 4 children. We are the administrators of the estate, the other 2 children, so and so. Our birth certificates have to be put in too, and they have consented in writing to us applying for the grant. So you should get that, and in death certificate, obviously, certified copy of the death certificate has to be included.
So I mean, there's a lot to discuss in this regard, and we are basically out of time. But before we go, I just want to pull up your text to start with the non-contentious probate and practice text. Just tell us a little bit about this text. Of course, it's used in many law schools and practitioners alike.
Well, I told you already. it's very challenging to have written it, because from the point of view, even though it's a second edition, so you could imagine the first edition, there really was not any, you couldn't go online and find Carrie Law or any of those websites, okay? So it was really trudging along from island to island. I have to thank the law school for giving me the chance to go up to every single island and do the research, because it was practice. So it was a tough haul, but it was something I felt I had to do, because it's a question of giving back.
And practitioners like myself, we use it.
And we write it for you all, we write it for the students, because we have the time as lecturers, because that's our job.
Yeah.
We're teaching so many students to do that.
And let's turn to the other text, which is also a very popular text as well. That's the Commonwealth Caribbean Family Law, husband, wife, and cohabitant, in terms of that particular text as well.
Again, I started teaching family law at Keyville, and same attitude I have. I mean, I had to do so much research, because when you're writing these, teaching in these faculties, unlike United States, you're not teaching one state. You have students from all different jurisdictions, and they get very upset when you want to sit down there and talk about Trinidad and Barbados and Jamaica. And they say, I'm not going back to those countries to practice, you know. I'm going back to St. Vincent, I'm going to Grenada. So it's a lot of, but at the end of the day, it helped me a lot, because it forced me to do the research, and having done all that research, I certainly felt I should write the book on it.
And it is constant updates in the law and practice, you know, of those books. So the two texts, that is the probate non-contentious text, as well as the family law text as well.
And just for the record, as I have told you, if I have made anything off of the non-contentious, it may have been 10 years ago, and I never did it to make money. I never ever, because I certainly don't.
To give
but
back.
It says I always feel giving back.
Indeed. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Mrs. Nunes Teixeira, for being a wonderful guest. Of course, we may invite you again, because of course, we have to continue this discussion, because family law is quite big, and it encompasses a lot of different peripheral areas.
Perhaps,
so thank you very much.
Perhaps you might think of asking people to send you questions, so that we could focus on what they think are important.
Indeed. I think that is a good noteworthy suggestion. Yeah. So thank you so much. You have been watching Strictly Legal on WESN Contents Capital. I am your host, Rondell Donowa. We had Mrs. Nunes Teixeira with us. See you then. God bless.
Thank you.